My fellow Americans, I come to you today to speak not about our past, as I've been speaking in the last day, or about plans for the channel going forward as the day before, but rather about events presently occurring within our democracy. Well, our republic with democratic soupçon. Specifically, the Republican Party is going through its primary elections right now, and the Democrats are going through their primary elections right now. And there's quite a lot revealed about the nature of party politics in this. And there's a vast majority of media coverage given to the Democratic primary. So I don't feel any particular need to cover its vagaries here. We're already hearing quite a lot about it in other sources, but I thought it might be beneficial to all of us to pierce the shadows momentarily and get a bit of a look at what's going on in the Republican primary. Many people probably aren't even particularly familiar with the candidates involved, so I'll start off with outlining those. From least relevant to our notice to probably most relevant. First off is from South Carolina, Mr. Mark Sanford, the former governor thereof, who has aspirations far beyond his station, given his inability to properly deal with the requirements of governing the single state of South Carolina, his propensity for disappearing, his lying to his own staff, awkwardness. Thy name is Mark Stanford. I gotta say, I give the man a lot of credit, actually, as far as politicians go. He is, for all of his duplicity, for all of his seeking to abuse his station and power for his own romantic conquest, he's never killed anyone, as far as I can tell. Which is, when you start getting up to that level of politics, starts becoming more and more possible. After him, we've got, Roque Antonio de la Fuente Alexander. Rocky. He's a perennial candidate from California. He's got some international flavor. He's a business owner, not only here in the States, but also in Mexico and Uruguay. He's a really smart guy. Got a STEM bachelor's degree and master's in business, and he's got a complicated history, not as flagrantly politically disqualifying as that of Mr. Stanford, but his financial misdealings in California weren't able to be kept under the rug, which means he either doesn't have enough favors in his own locality to keep how he does business under the wraps, or is doing things so flagrantly bad that even his friends won't care to protect him. Doesn't speak well for a national candidacy if you can't keep your own issues under the rug. Mr. Trump, of course, is probably the absolute star of this. I've, of course, gone for the policy of just not having issues. It's really not that complicated. My favorite candidate for the Republican primary, who has sadly already withdrawn, Mr. Joe Walsh. He's a fellow Illinoisan. His history in public service, he started off as a social worker, someone who was actually making the world a better place, turning the resources of our society into actual good for people. And during his time as a Congress critter from my state of Illinois, he did exactly what he promised he would do, and he sought to restrain government power to constitutional ends, and dang it, he's got a lot going for him. And his being gerrymandered out of politics by the Illinois DNC is just another sign of the system that we presently work under. I do have to give a lot of credit to the replacement that he Ms. Tammy Duckworth, very inspirational figure. But I find that no matter what she's trying to do in Congress, I find her actions always have a bit of a stain on them, because her displacement of Mr. Walsh was less than kosher in my book. Most significantly, of the minor challengers is, of course, Mr. William Weld, wicked smack guy out of Massachusetts there. He's got a very strong draw to a particular subset of the conservative or Republican side of the aisle, given his history with the Libertarian Party. He's actually responsible for a number of record firsts in the last few years, being a part of the Libertarian co-candidacy that got the most Libertarian votes in an actual presidential election. Him and Mr. Gary Johnson did very well for themselves. Not as well as they probably could have, but and a lot of it was probably due to their competition, being Ms. Clinton and Mr. Trump, not being the election that everybody wanted it to be. He's also proven in this election to be the first Republican in about 30 years to actually win a delegate against an incumbent president in the Republican Party. That's a big sign there. Not hardly enough, but it's a big one. What can we say, though, Mr. Weld? Not every election can be the one against Mark Roosevelt. And then, most importantly for the Republican primary is, of course, the incumbent sitting candidate, Mr. Donald Trump, a relatively known quality, given how much media attention he gets. The party has, of course, as expected, decided to throw in behind the incumbent candidate, recognizing there's a certain power and stability of leadership, and the draw this has for not just party members, but for the American people as a whole. Of course, not just in electoral circumstances, given their senators' actions during Mr. Trump's impeachment case before the Senate. A number of states across the country have already dispensed with holding primary elections or are dealing with lawsuits against their attempts to do so. And the state-level Republican parties seem to have a whole pile of justifications for this choice, given the results of the primary elections that have already gone by. Mr. Trump is presently so far ahead. Only one other candidate haven't gotten a single delegate vote. There's a reasonable suspicion that holding primaries is simply an unnecessary use of resources that can be better used elsewhere for their candidates, either lower on the ticket or for supporting Mr. Trump moving forward. And a lot of this shows why I'm not a huge fan of party politics. Mr. De La Fuente has struggled greatly over the years to try and enact electoral reform, getting ballot access for third-party candidates in a number of states. And he's struggling here to try and reform the Republican primary process, which is going to be a relatively large struggle for him, given that he has more ties with the Democratic Party than the Republican. And he's the sort of guy who can make friends everywhere, but not really. He's always the outsider, never the main show. But I have to commend him for his work in this regard. There are other areas of his life and his history that I simply don't agree with, but his work here is admirable and, at least in my eyes, justifiable. I, of course, am of the opinion that, well, much like Mr. Washington, of course, that parties in politics are not what this country was supposed to be built around. It was the rules as written, as it were designed for individual candidates, putting forward individual bodies of work and ideas. And the thought of a political party adjusting things, kind of pre-baking in compromises necessary so that the other political parties might be excluded, is a grave disappointment. It's a rather profound subversion of the democratic aspects of our republic. And the thought that a candidate might be provided such wealth, such support, such manpower from a political party, absent the winning over of each member thereof, the thought that how do I put this nicely? The thought of, rather than having to win the love and trust of everyone who'd care to vote for them, that the machinery might move forward is by rote rather than by action, by argument, or by love of candidate. That's a grave disappointment to me, and in the democratic sentiments that I hold. Well, the least we can do is try to make the world a better place. Mr. De La Fuente is, of course, doing his work to try and reform things, try and make changes where he can, and I appreciate that. Mr. William Walsh, Joe, I gotta appreciate how much you've done, even when you got pushed out rather unfairly there. You sought to maintain a bit of the public eye and keep doing what you can as far as trying to share your message and trying to change the world. Mr. Weld, I gotta give you credit for being probably the smartest guy in that field there, and you've done so much for drawing the public eye to real issues rather than mainstream media narratives or Trumpian declamation. And now I'd ask all of my viewers, we all don't have this sort of power that these even minor candidates wield. We're able to swing millions of dollars around to try and fund a candidacy. But we can each go out there and we can each try to do something to make the world a better place. And so I'm going to go out into today and I'm going to try and do my part. I'll talk to you all tomorrow, or maybe even later today. We'll see how it goes.